Chapter 30. Silent Warnings. I sat in the middle of the raised table in the galley, looking out over the gathered nobles who had come to help defend the wall. Most had seen the battle as a grand success, and that the number of men I asked for to be quite unnecessary. However, the battle still wasn't technically over. The dead had retreated back into the forest, but were still there, waiting patiently as another host of undead made their way south to reinforce them. Alan had scried their movements, and I had seen them for myself when I rode Mayroon out alongside several wargs who used their powers to take command of their falcons. After the initial battle, I had ravens sent to every major house in the realm, as well as to each major city. I commanded them to report to me if any ironborn ships came into their ports, and to report on the health and disposition of the ironborn. It would be nearly a week before we would get the first replies, since ironborn ships weren't guaranteed to be in port on any given day. But my people had disappeared, and I was determined to find out what had happened to them. "Meaning no offense, Your Grace," a minor noble from the Crown Lands said, "but your people are spread all across the waters of Westeros. Surely it's not surprising to see so few people on the Iron Island." "There is a considerable difference between seeing few people and seeing none," Alan answered. "The Queen and several scouting parties have scoured the island. It is completely devoid of life. No humans, horses, or livestock. There were no ravens sent to call for aid or to let anyone know that something might be wrong?" another noble asked. I shook my head. "Not that we can tell. No other houses have relayed any calls for aid, and as far as we can tell, ironborn ships have continued their normal patrols and shipping schedules." "Should we proceed under the belief that those on patrol or shipping goods are unaware of the disappearances?" Serena asked, as she tried her best to consider the logistics of everything we had to consider. "No," I replied. "Ships come into a port on the Iron Island every day. Patrols and merchants return at least once a week. The Iron Island's ports do not sleep. Every ship that docks with goods somewhere in Westeros sends a raven to the island to inform them of their progress so that schedules can be tracked. Someone somewhere knows something." Tyrion cleared his throat, a signal that he was going to make a suggestion that he knew I wouldn't like. "Perhaps you should issue a command to the Iron Fleet. Order them to anchor at the nearest port and have their captains report to you directly. They can send ravens explaining what they've been doing for the last few months." Mace gave a rumble and shook his head, causing his chins to waggle. "Impossible. The Iron Fleet makes up the vast majority of transportation for goods across Westeros. Anchoring their ships until each captain reports in would lead to a near-complete collapse of the economy overnight. Having them report in individually as they come into port is the only sensible solution," another noble from the crowd shouted. "We cannot simply bring shipments to a stop. We risk a recurrence of whatever happened on the Iron Island happening elsewhere if we do not stop the ships now," someone else countered. They were right to argue over the issue. I had turned the Iron Fleet into an efficient and integral part of Westeros's economy. The shipment of goods was dominated by the Iron Fleet, just as coastal defense was. Anyone trying to make war on Westeros would need to deal with the Iron Fleet first. Instead, the fleet seemed to be operating normally. Shipments were being delivered, new goods were transferred on, as others were transferred off. Pirates had long since given up on attacking ships in Westerosi waters. Had I not discovered the absence of the people on the island with my stone sense, who knows how long this mystery would have gone unnoticed. The problem was that I couldn't afford to simply abandon the wall. With the dead bringing reinforcements, the battle to defend Westeros wasn't finished. This was the problem. Whatever was happening, it was happening at the worst possible time for us. We were dedicated to the defense of Westeros in the north, while things in the south were starting to make no sense. That is assuming that whatever happened to Iron Island could happen to the rest of Westeros, someone spoke up. Can we say this isn't an isolated event? My lords, I ask that you all try to think rationally. Varys sighed. The Iron Island's population was not as large as most regions in the realm, but it was still considerable. So many people disappearing all at once must be considered some form of attack or emergency that we must respond to appropriately. My lords, I raised my voice to gain everyone's attention. The timing of this event is too precise. The disappearance of the people of the Iron Island should alarm us all. The fact that the Iron Fleet still continues to operate normally without the oversight of the Iron Island everywhere else should concern everyone greatly. At best, we are looking at a silent coup on the island. At worst, something horrible has happened to those people, and we must prepare ourselves should it happen to any other part of the realm. How can we know what to prepare for if we don't know? A man was asking before the door to the galley opened. All eyes turned to find Maester Pole leading Maester Aemon, the Maester of the Night's Watch, into the room. Aemon was old, thin with loose skin, bald with bushy white eyebrows, and as frail rotted wood. He was blind, but his hearing was sharp, and his mind sharper still. I stood out of respect for his position and the length of service he had dedicated to the realm. The others in the room did the same in respect to my social cue. Master Aemon, I smiled. He might not be able to see the gesture, but he could hear it in my voice. What do we owe the honor of your presence? Aemon chuckled. The sound was comforting and doting, as if it were your own grandfather who had heard one of his progeny speak, and he was proud of them regardless of what was said. Would that my presence could solve your problems, your grace? Aemon sighed. Alas, I bear a burden, which I'm afraid I must pass on to you. It has been 5 days since we have received a single raven from King's Landing. 5 days? I repeated. With the constant flood of petitions and information coming from all corners of the realm, I hadn't considered that we weren't getting anything from the capital. It was true the Lord Tarly kept his updates concise, but he had never gone more than 2 days without sending a raven, if just to report that there was nothing to report. What does that mean? Serena asked. Aemon turned to face Serena's voice. That is not for me to say, my lady. But it is very odd. Since the Queen has begun her stay here at Castle Black, we have received regular correspondence from the capital. It is quite odd not to hear from the city over such a period of time. I stood and looked out at the nobles gathered in the room. I need volunteers to come with me. We're taking a portal to King's Landing right now. Nearly every noble in the room was quick to volunteer. It was one thing for the Iron Island to suddenly go dark. But King's Landing? That was something different altogether. Nearly every man in the room had family there as a courtier, in charge of some kind of family business, or even just there to listen to rumors and pass them along. With no shortage of volunteers, we worked out who would stay to help command any battle that might take place against the dead should they come for the wall, and who would come with me to go to King's Landing and see if things are all right. It wasn't long before we had a force of nearly 1,000 men and dozens of portals ready to transport them to King's Landing. Remember, I called out over the gathered men, we are arriving on the edges of the city. If you see people walking around, say nothing. Do not alarm them. If you see no one, move in silence, but knock on every door. Investigate every building. Am I understood? Yes, Your Grace, came a roaring confirmation. Through the portals, I commanded. The groups began rushing through the portals. Alan waited for them all to go through before Serena, the Queen's Guard, and I went through our own. Once the dragons had each gone, though, Alan followed. We arrived in the highest tower of the Red Keep. Our goal was to search it from the top, down. As we began our search, I reached out with my stone sense, looking for any signs of life not associated with the men who were helping to search the city. But there was nothing. Even in a dead city, there should be animals, dogs, cats, rats. But there was nothing. There was no furniture out of place, no doors broken down, no signs of a struggle. The search lasted for 2 days as groups spread further and further into the city. Mehrunes led the dragons in, flying over the city and the surrounding lands to find any signs of life. It was as if the people had simply vanished. King's Landing, the most populous city in all of Westeros, with a population close to 1 million people, was a ghost town. No one reported any signs of struggle, no blood, nothing out of turn. In the span of a week, nearly 1.5 million people had disappeared from Westeros without a single trace. None of this makes any sense, Serena said, as we stood in the Great Hall. A city this big cannot simply go dark without some kind of trace. And yet it has, Alan sighed. He looked at me. And there's still no change to the shipping lanes? The Ironborn are still keeping to their schedules? Apart from making port at the Iron Island, yes, I replied. Though I suspect they'll stop coming here now as well. And with the dead still massing at the wall, we can't dedicate too many people to investigate this, Sir Barristan mused. Your Grace, with all due respect, I suggest you command the Iron Fleet to stay docked until their captain can report on what is happening. I understand what it might do to the economy, but with the Iron Island and King's Landing devoid of people, the economy is the least of our worries. He's right, Your Grace, Robert spoke up. Whatever is happening, someone or something has taken our people. This is an act of war, Serena nodded. I agree. It doesn't matter what's going on. We have to treat this as an act of aggression. I gave a nod, accepting their advice as I tried to think of what to do. We had the dead still massing at the wall, and now mass disappearances in the south. The capital city was empty. As far as I knew, there wasn't any force in the world that could make something like this happen. Looking at the others, I could tell they expected me to have some sort of plan. No matter what I chose, I was putting Westeros in danger. If I chose to dedicate our defense to the wall, more people could go missing in the south. If I sent forces south to investigate the disappearances, I was leaving the wall to possibly get overrun, while also understanding that the men would need months to get south. There was no scenario where I could reliably respond to whatever was happening unless I broke the rules of this world. Even considering doing that caused my stomach to ache and made me nauseous. That was another curiosity. In the wasteland, on the rare occasion I broke the rules, it never made me anxious. I simply didn't want to break the rules of that universe. Now it felt wrong. Using my magic and my stone sense didn't feel like cheating or breaking the rules, at least not to the level I had used them so far. But I could tell there was a line I didn't want to cross. I hadn't even noticed that until just now, when I was considering using all the options I had available on my own, without relying on the people and forces at my disposal. We'll return to Castle Black, I decided. We'll send ravens to the recruitment offices in every city, and to every house in Westeros. They'll be our eyes in the south. If disappearances start to occur in their areas, they can send us notice. From there, we'll have to figure out a plan. We have more than enough men stationed at the wall to hold back the dead, Serena pointed out. They don't have the numbers to break through any of the gates. Not yet they don't, Alan said as he considered the problem. But like Merida said, they're bringing in more reinforcements even as we speak. But not enough to take the wall, Serena repeated. Not yet, Alan replied. But we brought enough soldiers and enough supplies to take out 10 times the highest estimation of dead we believed there would be. But the soldiers weren't exactly conservative with their ammunition against that first wave. Serena sighed, accepting the logic. You're probably right about the ammunition. And you might be right about the men. If they can continue to keep calling in reinforcements, then we don't know what their true numbers are. There's possibility we could run out of arrows and pitch, then be unable to defend the gate properly. There's also no telling which gate they'll attack with each wave, I pointed out. They attacked Castle Black the first time, but there are 19 castles along the wall. They could attack any of them. Then it might be best that we return right away and start issuing orders to save ammunition, Serena said. Wait, I said, with a hint of inspiration. We don't need to split our forces. We already have a force in the south. I turned to look at the queens. I need a volunteer to lead the men we brought here on a mission. Each member of the guard, apart from Sandor, who wasn't fond of voluntary foolishness, eagerly stepped forward to volunteer. Your Grace, Sir Barristan said, please, allow me this honor. I have served in this role longer than any of the others. If this mission require keeping men from breaking, my reputation should serve to help with that. I looked at the elderly knight. Even now he could carve through the others like a cake, though now that Robert was back in shape, he might have some trouble with the stag. He was right. His reputation alone could inspire men should their spirits wane. Robert might be able to cower men into finding their spirits again, or simply obeying through fear. But something told me that Sir Barristan was who I needed for this job. Very well, Sir Barristan, I said as I smiled up at him, knowing full well this would likely be the last time I saw him. I need you to lead the men we brought with us along the shoreline. Head to Dragonstone first, then continue east. Send a raven if you can. If not, send a man to ride to the nearest house to send word. I want to know what's happening at every location you come to. It will be done, Your Grace. Sir Barristan bowed his head. I will endeavor to reach as many cities as possible. I nodded, appreciating the way he accepted the real possibility of his death with such calm and grace. Luck be with you, sir. Without another word, he turned and marched out of the great hall to speak to the men outside. They had been desperate to volunteer to help find out what was happening in King's Landing. Now, they would have the chance to truly hunt down the source of the disappearances. It would be having a chance of stopping it from claiming what remained of their families and lands. I had to believe they would take the duty and see it as an opportunity. Alan opened a portal, and we returned to the wall with more questions and no answers. Whatever was happening, it was nothing like what had happened in the books or show. For the first time since my battle against Seven and Thetis, I was scared.